Good morning. Good morning. Welcome to the Engineer Construction Lecture Hub. This is a live streaming. I want to discuss about something very important. Always, this is a platform where you get vital updates or insightful content as regards to construction. So today's topic, we are going to look at the vital steps, okay, in ground investigation. Now, as you know, ground or the soil is what carries the structure. Okay, every structure, are footed on the soil. So there is it's absolutely important to ascertain the true state of the soil before imposing load on it, gravity load. Now, I want you to understand that structure settles. All right, structure settles. Now, the settlement is dependent on the type of soil. We have different types of soil. We have cohesionless soil. We have expansive soil, compressible soil, in terms of their nature. All right, but in terms of their types, we have the clay soil, we have the sandy soil, we have the silt soil, clay, silt, and all of those are makeups of soil. Now, all of these type of soils behave differently, when loaded. Okay, so it's important that we first and foremost understand the type of soil we are dealing with. Then also, in trying to find out the type of soil, we can also be able to understand the angle of repose. Okay, the angle of repose is usually the angle that a soil will make, okay, without collapsing. All right, and that will also be needed, during excavation. It will also aid during excavation. Knowing the angle of repose for a soil will help to, give you idea on the depth to go during excavation, and also the type of excavation method to adopt. Okay, so generally, it's important that when we carry out investigation of the soil, it reveals so many parameters to us that we need to work with, because all in all, apart from the structure being stable, the smooth execution, okay, or the day-to-day activities of that construction work, okay, needs to be enhanced. All right. Now, having known the nature of the soil, you'll be able to understand in terms of the groundwater. You need to understand in terms of the stratas that makes up that soil. All right, you're welcome. You're welcome. So, the stratas that makes up the soil, you need to understand it, because there are some situations. You're welcome. You're welcome. So, you need to understand the stratas that makes up the soil. There are some situations where you have a very weak strata below, maybe 2-3 stratas below. Okay, now it is through investigation that you will be able to get to know this weak strata, the presence of this weak strata, and usually is compressible. So, and that is the strata that facilitates, settlement. That is why you see some structures, they settle rapidly. All right, but settlement ought to, take a long period of time, and most often it is not noticeable. Okay, it is not noticeable. Now, in some days past or some years past, in some locations, they tend to, plant a nail, below the ground level. That is, at that ground level, the part of the building that is exactly at the ground level. They plant a nail there, okay, and that nail will remain there for as long as. Now they try to observe this movement, this settlement that takes place in our building. All right, you see that over time that nail that you planted would no longer be visible. All right, it will no longer be visible. What now, when you trace that, trying to excavate to locate that nail, you will now be able to see the depth or the extent of settlement that have taken place. All right, and this is peculiar to mainly to expansive soil, compressible soil. All right, then in some locations you see that over time there will be piling of soil, okay, transported soil from a location. There are areas that are prone to, you know, movement of soil from one location to another, especially flowing water. Where you have flowing water, you see that soil will be transported from a certain location to another location. Now, when moving into another, usually a lower location, due to the catchment area, you see that that movement of soil as a result of flowing water will now deposit. You're welcome to the Engineer Construction Lecture. So there is tendency of transporting that soil from one point to another. Now, when it gets to that other point, it will pile up. All right, it will pile up. So over the years, you will discover that the head or the height of your building will be lessened. All right, and that you observe that mostly when you look at the window sitting. Okay, if you look at your window sitting, you see that probably you observe 1.2, you know, from the plain beam to the window sitting, you observe 1.2. But after a while, as a result of that piling up of soil, you know, for some maybe 11, 15, 16 years, you observe that the window sitting will be lower. Probably you must have observed it. Okay, in that case, not really settlement that took place. All right, it's as a result of the movement of that soil. And you also observe that by stretching your hands, you might even be touching the eave of your roof. All right, you might be touching it because the height has increased as a result of the deposit. Okay, the deposit of the soil that is being transported, you know, over time and piled up at a particular location. You see that will cause that building, you know, to be reduced in terms of the height. All right, so these are peculiar to soil. So you must understand all of these so that you can be able to situate your structures so that they won't have all of these, some of these lapses. All right, so today we are going to look at the steps. You're welcome. All right, so today we are going to look at vital steps, you know, in investigation, in ground investigation. What I just did is just an overview, and basically understanding your soil is very, very important. All right, because most of the issues that we have in our structures these days could be associated to lack of knowledge as regards to the soil where we have constructed on. All right, because it is the soil that carries the structure. Now you must understand the true state of the soil before imposing your structure on it. All right, because that has it has a direct implication on the stability of your structure. All right, now there are some cases where we have marshy soil. Now, marshy soil, you will discover that when you build on it without doing the needful, you see that the settlement will be rapid. All right, there will be rapid settlement, and there, in fact, that settlement will result to formation of cracks. So that is why you see once you build within a short while, in fact, even while the structure is still under construction, you see crack formations. All right, these are different nature of soil, okay, which if you have done the needful, that is investigation, you'll be able to provide the required foundation type to suit that kind of soil. Now, I want you to understand that every soil that we have suitable foundation for that type of soil. All right, but the problem we are having is that we try to bypass the aspect of investigating the soil and going directly to construction. This is absolutely wrong, and that is why we have problems in our structures these days. All right, we try to bypass knowing the kind of soil that we are trying to build on. All right, and you see that those structures will start having problems. Now, I want to throw this as an advice. As an engineer or builder, architect, whoever that is in charge of a project, it's important that you advise your clients to do the needful, okay, irrespective of the cost. Because at the end of the day, some engineers will see it, okay, they will get their fees, they will get all their charges and all of that. And at the end of the day, you see that it is a client that bears the brunt when these structures start failing. Okay, it is the client that bears the brunt, and that will have a negative image on your reputation as the engineer that constructed that building or whatever. All right, so it's important that whatever that is needed to be done, especially during preliminary stages of your construction work and the actual construction work, everything that is needed should be done, especially in the area of this investigation, soil investigation. All right, although it requires some commitments, okay, in it, but it is absolutely important and necessary that you understand the soil that you're building on, okay, because understanding the soil that you're building on will give you a clear perspective on the type of foundation that will be suitable for that kind of soil. And when you get, let me also throw this to you, when you get your foundation right, definitely that structure will maintain that required stability, and the longevity of that structure will be enhanced. All right, so you agree with me that the foundation is what rests on the soil. It's what that is the part of the structure that has a direct interface with the soil. So when you have known the kind of soil that you want to build on, all right, or you want to build your structure on, that will now give you a clear understanding on the selection of the foundation type. And that will also give you idea on the excavation method to adopt for that construction. All right, the excavation method to adopt. Then it will also give you clue on the groundwater in that location. That is the piezometric level of groundwater in that location. All of these can be discovered during ground investigation. So it's holistic in nature. So we shouldn't bypass soil investigation or ground investigation prior to construction, because it has a lot of benefits. All right, it has a lot of benefits. Now let us dive into those steps I talked about. So first, we must determine the sequence. Okay, we must determine the sequence, the thickness, and the lateral extent of the soil strata. Like I said, soil has stratas. Soil is made up of stratas. Okay, now for you to understand these stratas I'm talking about, for example, if you're excavating your septic tank, the space for your septic tank, maybe depending on the depth you're going, probably you're going for maybe 2.7 meters, 3 meters, as the case may be. That is the depth of your septic tank. Now, you discover that during excavation, if you can carefully observe, you look at the wall of the soil, the excavated edge of that septic tank, the excavated pit of your septic tank. If you watch the wall, if you look at carefully, if you look at the wall of that soil, you discover the different layers that makes up that soil. You discover the different layers, and those layers has their various thicknesses. Okay, they have their various thicknesses. Okay, now if you also observe carefully, you will see that the coloration too differs. The textures also differ. That is to tell you the various layers, below. Now, these different layers below have their various strengths. Okay, have their various strengths. Now, when you carry out ground investigation, you'll be able to ascertain these strengths. Okay, you'll be able to ascertain these strengths. And let me also bring this to our notice, that this sequential order of these stratas have a direct impact on the structure, because when you load that soil at the surface or at a particular depth, you still have other depths unknown. You still have other depths, other layers below that is unknown. Okay, if you don't carry out soil ground investigation. Now, when you load that structure, it's expected that as the load comes, the load travels at 45 degrees as it goes down. Okay, it travels at 45 degrees. That means that load, especially the contact area of your, if you adopted a pad foundation, your pad footing, the spreading mechanism of your pad footing is at 45 degrees, the spread. Now, what it simply means is that as that intensity of that load from your pad is being transferred to the soil, it's expected that that load should spread at 45 degrees as it's going down. So, this load, the intensity of this load is expected to cut across these stratas I talked about. All right, and as it cuts across these stratas, it's expected that the intensity should reduce, or should be decreasing. Okay, as it cuts across these stratas. All right, but there are some cases where maybe 2 stratas below, you meet a very compressible soil. All right, soil differs from location to location. All right, now for you to actually know the true state of the soil, it is via investigation, soil or ground investigation. Now, there are some cases, like I said, you might have a stable soil at 2 stratas. Okay, you might have a stable soil at 2 stratas. Now, maybe the 3rd, 4th stratas might be weak. Okay, what I mean weak is highly compressible. All right, now without ground investigation, or you bypass ground investigation and you just choose randomly a foundation type, maybe the usual pad foundation, okay, or your strip foundation, depending on the kind of structure you're building, and you neglected doing your ground investigation, and you impose that structure. Once the gravity load comes on that soil, the spread, that transmission or that distribution of that load that cuts across those strata will get to that point where that compressible soil is. Instead of it to be lessened, okay, that is where the intensity will cause more havoc, okay, because it's expected that the soil should pose resistance to the gravity load that is being transmitted through the contact area in our foundation. It's expected that the soil should pose resistance, and it is that resistance that the soil poses that brings about the stability, okay, and that is what we usually try to find out, which is the bearing capacity of the soil, okay. It is the ability of the soil, to sustain a load prior to failure. All right, so you see that the bearing capacity varies, from location to location. So, like I said, these stratas, probably you have two stratas that look stable, and you just did your excavation, do your foundation work and all of that. Now, as you keep on loading that soil, as the construction progresses, you know that the load also will increase. The gravity load will also increase. Now, the increment in that load will also be transmitted, to the soil. Now, that soil is expected, based on the strata, is expected to, transmit or spread that load. Now, that load is expected to be, going down. As it's going down, the intensity will be lessened, okay, will be reduced. The intensity is expected to reduce, all right? That is why we ascribe that bearing capacity of the soil increases with depth, okay? The bearing capacity of the soil increases with depth. But peradventure, you have weak stratas, okay, below. You see that those weak stratas will have adverse effect on that transmission or that distribution of load, because each strata is expected to pose resistance to the load, okay. Each strata of the soil is expected to pose resistance to the load. So peradventure, you have a very weak strata below, unknowing to you. You discover that instead of that weak strata to pose resistance to the load will now overcome that strata, and that strata is what will cause problem to that structure, because the load will tend to respond to that weak strata, okay. The load will now tend to respond more to that weak strata, and once that weak strata start failing, you see that the other stable strata above will also fail, okay. Those other strata you that seems to be stable will also fail alongside that weak strata. So that is why it's important that we look at our soil critically. We look at our soil critically, engage a geotechnical engineer to carry out investigation, okay, advise your clients, okay, to do. It is absolutely important, most especially when you're going for, buildings that, that you are anticipating high magnitude of load, okay. It is absolutely important that you investigate the soil so that you will be abreast with all necessary information as regards to the soil formation. Have it in mind that every formation, every soil have their various formation. Location A soil formation will definitely be different from location B soil formation. And please there is also this notion of trying to get a result at location A and use the result of or the outcome of your investigation in location A to judge location B. It is absolutely wrong. Okay, it is absolutely wrong. Soil makeup differs even within a very close range. Within a location, the soil makeup also differs. All right, the soil makeup also differs. So it is wrong for you to judge another location, okay, with the outcome you got in terms of your investigation from a particular location. All right, it is absolutely wrong. So let us imbibe that culture of doing the needful, as regards to investigation. So like I said, in this live streaming, we are looking at the steps. Okay, so the sequence, the thickness, and the lateral extent is very, very important. These are what we look out for, during ground investigation. Okay, we look out for these parameters, during soil investigation. All right, so if you're just joining us, we are looking at steps, in ground investigation. All right, so we've talked about the sequence. We need to determine the sequence, the thickness, and the lateral extent of that soil. Then we also have to look at usually we obtain sample, and that sample all right, so back to what I was saying. So we obtain a sample, okay, of the soil for the identification and classification. All right, we in the course of the ground investigation, we obtain sample from the soil. Okay, we take it to the laboratory. Now we also do identification, okay, physical identification. All right, then we also classify that soil, okay, based on its class. All right, all of these are a way of trying to know that soil to the fullest. All right, so that sample that will be gotten from the location, we try to do identification and classification. All right, so that is also a step in knowing the ground during ground investigation. Then also we determine the relevant soil parameters. Now that same sample that we've gotten, we have to carry out some tests on that soil to identify some parameters. All right, now such parameters is the shear strength. Okay, now at this point we have two perspectives. Okay, we have two perspectives. We can do in situ test. All right, that is soil investigation in situ. That can be, we can know the bearing capacity of the soil, all right, at site by doing a load plate test, core penetration test, and all of that. Okay, standard penetration test. Now that will also reveal the strength, okay, of those soil stratas as well. That can be done in situ. All right, then in the laboratory we get sample, we take it to the laboratory, we carry out direct shear test or triaxial test. All right, that will enable us to obtain parameters for our shear strength. Okay, we obtain parameters for our shear strength, and that parameter we have gotten from the shear strength, from the shear test, direct shear test or triaxial shear test, will enable us, because we have to strain that soil. We have to strain it. So in the course of the test, we are straining that soil sample, because the soil sample is a representative of the soil in that location, and usually it could be undisturbed, okay, although it is practically difficult to get undisturbed, but we see it as undisturbed based on the mode of extraction. All right, although trying to extract it, the soil will still be disturbed. All right, so but it is to an extent minimized. So such a soil is what we can now use to carry out our direct shear test, okay, in the laboratory, or triaxial test. In that case, now we try to strain that soil. We impose stresses to that soil. Now, trying to impose stresses to that soil, we can now know the resistance that that soil, or the response of that soil to the stresses that are imposed on them as a result of this test I just mentioned. All right, so at the end of the day, we are expected to plot a graph, okay, where we are going to a Mohr circle, okay, where we are going to now obtain the angle of internal resistance, or angle of, that is frictional, angle of friction. All right, that angle of friction is what we need to determine the bearing capacity, as regards to that soil. All right, we need that frictional angle of friction, okay, and also the cohesion, the value for our cohesion, okay, for that particular soil. These are the two parameters that we usually obtain after we have carried out our laboratory test, okay, via the triaxial test or direct shear test, as the case may be, direct shear box test, okay, as the case may be. So we try to, now we plot the Mohr circle, we get the angle of friction, we get the cohesion. All right, so with these two parameters, we can be able to, determine the bearing capacity of the soil empirically. All right, but we can get it directly also, like I said, in situ at site via your standard penetration or core penetration test, your load plate test, and all of that. All right, so that is that. So we determine the relevant soil parameter. That is also one of the steps in ground investigation. We obtain relevant soil parameters, okay, e.g. the strength, like I mentioned, the strength, the shear strength of the soil, the bearing capacity. All of these are parameters that we obtain from the soil. Then also we identify the groundwater. So in the course of ground investigation, we also get to know the groundwater, okay, because every location has groundwater. All right, there are some areas where the water rises, all right, due to seasonal variations. Water rises. Now, if you do your soil or ground investigation, you'll be able to know the level of that, the piezometric level of the groundwater, and that will also give you clue on the depth of excavation to go, okay, and also that will also guide you on the foundation type to go, because when you have known the groundwater and also you know the suitable foundation based on the nature of the soil, you know the suitable foundation for that kind of soil, then another thing you need to also know is the groundwater, because water also poses some threat during construction, all right, especially during excavation as well. So when you have known the groundwater, you'll be able to know the kind of the depth to go. So generally, all of these have all of these plays a very vital role in the overall well-being of our structure. So we shouldn't just go directly to construction. We must carry out these preliminary studies, okay, before or prior to construction, because they have a very important role, when it comes to the construction aspect of that structure. So let us endeavor not to bypass ground investigation. All right. So please, at this point, if there are questions, contributions, so far as regards to the topic of discourse, you can also drop them at the comment section. Like I said, always said, this is a platform where insightful content will be dished out. All you need to do is to, continually stick to Benginia Construction Lecture Hub. I'm committed to, to give out vital information as regards to construction, because basically the objective is to enhance a better built environment. All right. So I will also want to talk about defects, okay, because when you don't carry out soil investigation, automatically it is the structure that will develop defects. In some cases, most cases, structural defects. The structural defects, I mean the manifestation of these movements, okay, below usually affects our foundation. Okay, it affects our foundation. And once our foundation is affected, automatically it will, it will get to the superstructure. It will be more visible, in our superstructure. So it's important that we look at the substructure critically, because the longevity of your superstructure is dependent on the solidity of your substructure. Okay, so I want you to have that in mind. Now, usually the substructure is taxing, all right, but we must give it that needed attention. Okay, we must give it that needed attention. So every requirement or everything that is needful at that stage should be done, because it have direct impact, okay, on our structure. All right. So also have it in mind that soil differs from location to location, and it is wrong for us to judge a particular location based on the results we got from another location. All right. So we must look at soils differently. We address them differently, and that will give us idea on the type of soil foundation type. And that also brings me to this aspect, okay, of the type of foundation we go for. Now, during investigation, you discover that several stratas are weak. There are some cases where the stratas below, depending on the location, there are weak stratas. So when you are not expecting a very large magnitude of load to be imposed on that structure, that is why you see in some cases the ideal type of foundation will be pile foundation, because pile foundation will help to transfer that load down to a more stable soil strata. because what the pile does is that the pile will cut across several stratas. Across those weak stratas, it will cut across those weak stratas, okay, down to a more stable strata, depending on the type of pile you are adopting. If it's an end-bearing pile type or a friction pile type, because if you are adopting a friction pile type, you know that that pile depends on the friction that will exist between its own surface and the surface of the soil wall. Okay, it is that friction that exists that will help to sustain that load. Okay, so such a pile is what we refer to as a friction pile. Okay, it's what we refer to as a friction pile. But end-bearing piles are those piles that rests on a stable soil layer, maybe a bedrock. Okay, once that pile encounters a bedrock, that is where it gets its support from. Okay, so you see that is why pile foundation is regarded as the best type of foundation, and it is adopted in extreme case, in an extreme case, all right, where the soil is extremely weak. Okay, where the stratas are predominantly weak soil stratas. Okay, when you encounter such, okay, you go for a pile foundation. All right, so it is absolutely the outcome of your ground investigation that will give you a clear understanding on the suitable foundation type for that structure. All right, so it's important that you advise your clients, on the need to carry out geotechnical investigation of the soil prior to construction. Okay, because it will do the structure good, it will also do good to you, it will also do good to the client. Okay, because once the needful is done, you see that you avoid a lot of defects that might emanate as a result of those lapses that might occur during the service or the lifespan of that structure. All right, so please, like I said, if there are comments, contributions, to the topic, you can also drop them. That is more of making this session an interactive session. I can see some of the comments, dropped. Going to look at them after now. All right. So if you have some other contributions, you can also drop them as well. All right. So I intend to stop here for today. I appreciate every one of you that has been online all through. Thank you so much. I'm going to see you in the next live session that will be coming up soon as well. This will be on another interesting topic, so thank you so much. I love you all. Bye.